Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on day 3 of Community Care's Festival of Learning Week. I'm Ruth Hardy-Mellings, Head of Content at Community Care, and I'm really pleased to be here today for our session on Learning, Not Blaming, Promoting Reflection and Critical Thinking, delivered by our partner Cafcass. So just before I hand over to our expert speakers, I just wanted to explain a few housekeeping rules to help make sure you make the most of this webinar. To make the presentation full screen, just click on the icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the slideshow, and the presentation will be shared with attendees after the webinar by email. If you're experiencing any tech difficulties at any point, please just use the Event Help button at the top right of the screen, and an IT technician will be able to assist you. There will be time at the end of the webinar for questions, so please use the Ask a Question button throughout the webinar, and we'll then collate these and put them to the panel at the end. If you don't want us to share your name or organisation when reading out your question, please just prefix it with anon. So I think that's it on the housekeeping front. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Jack Cordery.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth. Yes, a very warm welcome, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jack Cordery, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm the director at Cafcass, the national director at Cafcass. We're going to talk to you today about our intention and the progress we're making in establishing a culture of learning, not blaming. So why that title? Well, one of the things that we do know is that very often social workers are blamed when things go wrong. And social workers have an incredibly complex and difficult task in gathering and analysing all the information that's available at the time. I really want to emphasise that, at the time, in order to make recommendations to the court or to make decisions about a child. In the vast majority of cases, they make a major contribution to making a positive difference to the lives of children, helping them to achieve better outcomes and a brighter future as well. But it is inevitable that we don't always get things right. When we don't, we need to learn from those incidences. That's our moral commitment to the children and the families that we work with, and to commit to learning, to be open to learn from them, and not to be fearful of blame and condemnation. There's nothing worse than feeling fearful to stop learning. It becomes overwhelming. So that's the reason for the title today. Social workers in the role of family court advisor and child's guardian are no different in terms of the dilemmas they face, the competing and contradictory often stories, information and evidence. And they have to find their way through that and try and determine what is best for the children and to make recommendations to the court. Our commitment at Cafcass is to be open when we've not got things right, to engage with children and families, to listen to complaints and to learn from complaints, and from professional colleagues too. And so to keep learning and to keep getting better at what we do. We've got 3 speakers today, Dawn, Sarah and Kathy, who are going to introduce themselves. Look forward to your questions at the end. I'm going to pass those to the panel. But for now, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Dawn.
Thank you, Jack. Hopefully everyone can see the slides and also see me this morning. So good morning. My name is Dawn Goodwin. I am one of the heads of practice in the National Improvement Service at Cafcass. The other speakers will introduce themselves to you as they join you and speak to the slides this morning. Starting off here, just confirming for you where we're going to take you today, what we're going to talk to and what we're going to talk about. We'd like to explore with you today how, as leaders and managers, we create space for reflection and critical thinking with colleagues in Cafcass. We're going to talk to you around our Together framework, expand on that a little, and discuss group supervision and how we utilise that to understand the uniqueness of the children and the families that we work with. And we are going to explore our learning from when things don't go well and when we can do better. So, as it says on the slide, how we do things around here. Whilst there is absolutely a place for ensuring compliance with policy and guidance, we are shifting the balance of supervision in Cafcass in all of its guises towards reflection and learning. Too often, supervision can be dominated by processes and tasks, and not enough time is given over to reflection and critical thinking. So professional supervision for Cafcass social work practitioners is a requirement. And it's a requirement that is aimed at maintaining and improving the quality and the impact of practice. Now, this is for all Cafcass social work qualified practitioners, regardless of experience or employment status. We believe that effective supervision is built on mutual respect and trust, and it balances support with challenge. It should encourage reflection, and it should support colleagues to find creative solutions to the complex and the emotional challenging situations that can arise in our work with children and young people and their families. One of the key differences for social workers in Cafcass is the autonomy and the independence of their role. They are experts by definition, and as an employer, Cafcass supports that and it promotes it as well. Our operational managers understand the origins of the role of the family court advisor, of the children's guardian, and they are striving to get the balance right. The balance between respecting that professional judgment, that independence of our FCAs and our guardians, and constructively challenging thinking, ensuring practice quality standards are met and that we strive to the best possible practice at all times. A really important element in the reflective supervision within Cafcass is about enabling colleagues to question their practice, to critically analyse, to evaluate their experiences, and also hold space to debrief after challenging or stressful encounters. This leads to a better understanding of the cognitive and the emotional elements of practice, those things that sit behind it. And I wanted to just touch briefly as well at this point around our Social Work Academy. We host third-year students and also newly qualified social workers work within Cafcass as well. For anyone who is in the session today who perhaps is a student, were you placed with us in your third year? Your supervision is delivered in line with university requirements. As I say, all Cafcass colleagues receive supervision. So it's reflective supervision every time. And one of the focuses within that student supervision is not just looking at the work, but the journey as well, that growth. We want to see that charted from day 1 to day 100 of that final placement. And our Social Work Academy also offers optional supervision drop-ins as well, weekly sessions, not just about the work that's being undertaken with families, but discussions around legislation and policy, those thorny issues that underpin and surround practice. And there are opportunities as well within that to really bring those cohorts together. We are a national organisation. Our students, our newly qualified social workers can be based anywhere from Newcastle to Newquay. So it's really important that within those spaces, we create those relationships, we build those networks as well. Those sessions are incredibly well used and they're accessed as well. And we believe they're helpful to our students in enhancing their placement experience. They offer reflection and consultation as well to our practice educators. In the room today, somewhere watching us hopefully, is Stephen Anderson, who is one of our assistant service managers who works within the Social Work Academy. So if you do have any questions around that, please do put them out there. I will do my best to answer them, or I will call on Stephen's expertise via the magic of Teams and other platforms. And just to say, if you are a newly qualified or a student coming towards the end of your placement and thinking about where you want to take that newly qualified year, similar supervision is offered as well to those colleagues. They are weekly drop-ins, they are reflective, and we also strive to hold that reflective space for our newly qualified colleagues, to hold those moments around critical reflection of themselves in practice as well, led by need, led by what those colleagues bring to that. As I say, all of our Cafcass social work colleagues are offered the space for these conversations, for this reflection that can underpin practice. I said at the beginning in one of the aims that we were going to talk to you together, which is our practice framework, and that is exactly what we're going to do now.
Thank you, Dawn. My name's Sarah Dickinson and I'm an improvement manager within Cafcass's National Improvement Service, and I've worked with Cafcass for over 10 years now. So I'm going to talk to you shortly about group supervision and how we use group supervision within Cafcass to promote reflection and critical thinking. But first of all, I wanted to do that within the context of thinking about our practice framework together with children and families, which underpins our group supervision model and all of our work within Cafcass now. So I'm just going to talk you through together with children and families, which is our practice framework, and it's together is the name for our relationship-based practice framework. And it's a framework which sets out for us our values, how these values work in practice, the difference this should make in our work, and the materials we use to sustain and improve effectiveness of our work with all children and families. And it's a framework founded in relationship-based practice and really listening to families and children and using relationships to enable positive change. Importantly, Together was developed collaboratively with colleagues across Cafcass and formally launched in September 2021. And the Family Justice Young People's Board, who work alongside us, have also advised and reflected with us as we continue to be involved with us as our practice and our improvements evaluated. And that idea of working alongside the Young People's Board and collaboratively with colleagues to continue to reflect on where we're at and how we continue to learn is really important as we develop our practice framework. Next slide, please. So why is Together important? So as I said, Together represents all of our values and the values in action, and the values guide our behaviour. Together supports consistency in our practice and in all of our work across the organisation. And it's important to note that Together's a framework for everybody who works in Cafcass. It's not only practice colleagues, but our colleagues across business services and our corporate teams. The framework's also important to them as well and guides the work that they do. And in doing so, it's our chance at Cafcass to offer every child an exceptional service and provides an opportunity to influence their futures in the best way we can. The framework centres us on thinking about relationships rather than processes and using our authority with care. Families are important to all children, and taking time to understand what's happening and explaining what we think to them, what we think is best for them and why is the right thing to do. And that's at the very heart of Together. And it also provides us, as Dawn said, with the language of the way we do things around here, which enhances our organisational culture as well as our practice. And I'm going to hand back to Dawn now, who's just going to talk us through the values within the framework.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, just very briefly, just to touch on these with you. These images you can see on the slide, these words you can see beneath those images are our Together values. They underpin, they guide, they influence all of our work with children and families and with colleagues as well. This is not just about what we do externally, it's about how we work with one another as well. Linked to each of the values that you can see is a practice element. And the intention of that is to support us to think about how those values are brought to life. They are active, they are not just words on a page. So for group supervision, for example, this is linked to the value of always looking for strengths and risks. Just further on these other values as well. In practice, what this means is that we demonstrate through our relationships that we are making balanced decisions. And the difference that that makes for children and families is shown in our reports and our records. They are fair and balanced. We capture the strengths and the difficulties for families and how they affect children. So I'd like to talk through some of the ways that we create space for reflection and critical thinking in supervision now. Thinking around situational supervision, for those of you that are social workers in the room, this may be the one that jumps to mind perhaps the most. So to support our managers, to support our leaders in Cafcass, we developed supervision practice quality standards. So supervision is seen as a priority. It's given dedicated space and time. It's one-to-one, it's regular, and it's planned. It's structured. It's provided by suitably experienced and trained supervisors. And it should give the supervisee a safe and a confidential space. Now, both the supervisor and the supervisee are responsible for creating that psychologically safe space that's based on mutual respect and trust. And in Cafcass, case supervision is available at point of need. So when it's requested by the supervisor or the supervisee, but also it's required when certain circumstances arise. It's responsive, it's voluntary in its nature, and it's really there for practitioners to seek out and check out their analysis, check out those recommendations, or to explore and ask questions around legal, professional, or ethical dilemmas that they may be experiencing related to the work they're undertaking with a family. On the slide are some examples of some of the questions that can be and are used in supervision to structure the conversation. Now, if I think about it from a practice perspective, if I take it away from just being words on the page and think about it very clearly from a practical place, if, for example, a family court advisor had completed some direct work with a child who was separated from their younger brother, and this could be either public law or private law proceedings, they might share things like this with us. These are some of the thoughts on the slide that we might hear or see in that reflective supervision discussion. And these are just examples, some things to bounce off from. You, I'm sure, will have your own thoughts around places that the questions from the previous slide might have taken you, either as a supervisor or as someone seeking out, exploring those issues within a family that you're working with. It is crucial for our practice staff to understand a child's world through their eyes, so they can begin to understand harm and impact. Now, some of the behavioural detail that is captured on the slide is really just a flavour of where that would go. And undoubtedly, you have your own thoughts, particularly around impact, what the impact for this young person might have been in the past and might still be in the immediate future, or indeed the longer term. Within situational supervision, a Cafcass manager would explore those thoughts with that FCA, with that colleague, unpicking the evidence, thinking about next steps, and also thinking about the recommendations that we would want to put before the court. We're going to move on now and talk to you a little bit around group supervision.
Thank you, Dom. So I'm just going to talk us through why group supervision is important within Together, and then I'm going to talk you through a couple of models that we use within group supervision in Cafcass. So as it says there on the slide, group supervision is a core component of best practice, and it promotes a culture of sharing learning and working together to understand risks, strengths and uniqueness. And it provides a space for working collaboratively with colleagues to reflect on how we make a difference for children and how we think together about complex work. The approaches used by Cafcass in group supervision support teams to engage in strengths-based reflective discussions with clear solutions being identified. And working collaboratively as a team to think about complex work is really important in achieving the very best outcomes for children and families, as we draw on the wealth and knowledge of experience we have across various teams. Working together in this way promotes the building of relationships within teams, and it helps colleagues to feel supported and valued, something really important within our practice framework. And through group supervision, teams are encouraged to critically reflect and challenge unconscious and conscious biases. There should be safe spaces to be able to explore those differing views and perspectives. Next slide, please. So one of the approaches used within the Together Group Supervision model is appreciative inquiry. And this approach provides us with a framework for asking questions focused on strengths and successes. And it's a way of understanding what has worked well, even in difficult times and difficult places, and the difference it's made to children and families. And it's a simple but impactful approach to conversations. And across Cafcass, we've seen it used in direct work with children and families, as well as amongst colleagues within group supervision spaces and other spaces. Using appreciative inquiry in group supervision can help colleagues to explore the strengths within the family alongside understanding the risks, and to explore what happened, the impact this had, and what's been learned from the experience that can be shared with others or done differently next time. It's also an approach used to share good practice and celebrate successes, and to support others to learn from this. Stephen Covey says that most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. And appreciative inquiry really helps us to better engage in active listening. It's important to remember that appreciative inquiry shouldn't be a script. It still needs to be an authentic conversation, but that takes practice, and group supervision provides a great space for us to practice that. Next slide, thank you. So I'm just going to talk you through the model that we use within Cafcass, and that's that we use the acronym of EARS, which is quite a simple approach that we use to help us understand how to use the appreciative inquiry model. And so the E there is for elicit, and that's where we look for the organising question for the whole conversation. So what do we want to focus on? So, for example, with colleagues, we might say, tell me about a piece of practice using together that went well, either that you've been involved with or something that you've seen. Or if we're working directly with a parent, we might ask a question around, has there been a time when arrangements for your child worked better, or when the local authority thought your child was safer? The A then is for amplify, and that's where we're looking for the behavioural detail around the situation. So had we been there, what would we have seen and what would we have heard? So thinking about questions like who did what, where and when, what made this situation better, what happened that made this piece of work important, how did you know what you were doing was working and what difference did you see, how did you make it happen, what else did you do, who else was involved and how did they help, and importantly, what would the child say you did to contribute to achieving the outcome? The R then is for reflect, and that's where we are exploring the meaning behind the responses given. So questions like, when you think about this piece of work, what's the most important thing you learned? What's the thing you feel proudest of? What do you think the child would say about the situation at the time that was different for them? And we can also bring scaling into the reflection section of the appreciative inquiry. So on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you rate the practice or the situation, and give opposite ends for that scale? And what would be needed to move you up that scale? So thinking about the next step and what would have made that situation even better. And then the S is for start over, and that allows the conversation to flow, but continuing to bring into the conversation, amplifying and reflecting questions. Next slide, please. Another approach that we use within the group supervision model is solution circles. And these are based on the work of Mark Finnis, who is a leader in developing restorative practice and has worked closely with colleagues within Cafcass to support us as we've developed and implemented together. And the approach of solution circles, again, is centred on teams working collaboratively in order to get from a problem to a solution quickly, and tends to work best where there's a clearly defined problem or a challenge or dilemma that someone wants to explore through a group supervision space. And the aim of solution circles is to find a restorative solution, and the whole team are encouraged to work together to share their best thinking, again, drawing on that wealth of knowledge and experience we have across teams. And in working in this way, the importance of connections between colleagues is really emphasised and relationships strengthened. Solution circles are based on the idea that all participants are equal and should have the opportunity to be seen, valued and heard, and ideally come together in person and physically move to sit in a circle, which can encourage power sharing, minimise any sense of hierarchy within teams, and encourages cooperation. But that's not to say that solution circles can't work in remote spaces, and we've seen some great examples of solution circles being used remotely and working really, really well. Next slide, please. So I'll just walk us through the model that we use for solution circles. As I said, ideally you want everyone in a circle, physically sat together for the reasons that I outlined. But as I said, we can make solution circles work well in remote spaces as well, and we've seen that within Cafcass. And what we want alongside the person who's bringing the issue or the problem, the dilemma that they want to reflect with the group about, we've also got a facilitator who's responsible for keeping everybody on time. And that's really important because what we want to be focused. So the first step in solution circles is for the practitioner to outline the issue. So we want them to clearly set out without interruption from the rest of the group. And that's quite important. As social workers, we like to ask questions, but we want to hear from the practitioner their issue without interruption. And we're going to give them up to 4 minutes to do that. And then step 2 is where we're asking clarification questions. And this is the only time where there's dialogue between the wider group and the practitioner. And the group can ask clarification questions such as, when does this happen? How often? Who else is involved, etc. And it's really important for the facilitator at that stage that they make sure that no solutions are offered. Because what we don't want to get into is a dialogue of, well, I've tried that, that won't work. It's really important that we're focusing on just asking clarification questions at that stage. Then in step 3, that's where the whole group are coming together to share ideas, or our best thinking, as we like to talk about. And we're hearing them from the group, what thoughts and ideas they have about what might support the practitioner with the issue that they've brought. And the practitioner is writing those ideas down whilst hearing from colleagues. And again, it's really important that the person who's bringing the issue to the group or the problem that they work on, they're not offering back out to the group their views around, oh, don't think that'll work, I've done that before, that won't help. We want them to engage in actively listening to what their colleagues are saying. And then the final step, step 4, that's where the practitioner is going to reflect back the list of ideas that they've heard and share with the group the top 2 or 3 that they're going to action and use in the future. And then ideally what we'd want to do is, when we come back to a group supervision, is hear from that practitioner what they went away and did, what difference that made, what worked well and perhaps what's still challenging, even revisiting solution circle, social work circle, a solution circle with a more refined or developed problem that they want to explore. So alongside offering opportunities for learning and development, the 2 approaches really promote relationship-based practice through colleagues coming together and sharing the best thinking to find solutions. And I attended Gillian Roost's session yesterday on listening and talking to children, during which she explored relationships in social work practice. And she said, we're often too focused on doing social work rather than being in relationships. And I think that the models that I've just talked through and the approaches we have in group supervision really allow for both of this. So to do good social work, but also focus on the building of relationships with colleagues, with one another, and indeed with children and families. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Kathy, who's going to talk to us a little more around group supervision and how it's used within her team and the difference it's making.
Hi, I'm Kathy Gissing. I'm a children's guardian and family court advisor within the Lincolnshire team, so I've worked at Cafcass for a while. I just need to give credit to Sarah Williamson, who helped put this information together. She's a practice supervisor, but unfortunately she's poorly. So I'd be giving this information from a slightly different point of view than what Sarah might have done. So I think group supervision in our team started, must be about 18 months ago. I'm not sure exactly, but that's when I can remember it starting. And we worked as a team to come up with a model that works best for us. There was a clear plan in place for how that would be set up. So it is mandatory. So it goes in our diaries and it's done online. So that helps people attend in the best way they can rather than us having to come to the office. Lincolnshire's a huge county and we're very spread out. So that helps us all join in. The time is quite strict so that people aren't worried about getting to their next meeting or it finishing on time. So that's in place too. Sarah's put here that there's targeted support and coaching to new starters in group supervision spaces, but alongside that, that would be to be helping to give them confidence to contribute to those groups when they're new starters and they're finding their feet in a new organisation and with a new role. Some are more confident than others. And one of the things that does happen, as Sarah outlined in the way the questions happen in those solution circles and group supervisions, each person is asked in turn what idea they've got or what question they want to ask, so that everybody gets a chance to say rather than having to find the courage to put their hand up. There was some resistance. I'm not sure what that was, but I can guess it might be, another thing in our diary when we've got so much to do anyway. But it's so useful and it really does generate a lot of knowledge and ideas, which ultimately does save you time because you've got that in your kind of toolkit and your bag of tips to help you work with families. And I think individual supervisions would have been helped to offer good support to staff to help them feel they can take part in that and get some value out of it. And there was continued reflection on what was working well and what could make them better. So there was some tweaking about what the best questions would be, time-ins, and a template over the first group sessions. There's a facilitator, somebody who keeps time. Facilitator will do things like if somebody starts giving a solution when we're supposed to be asking clarifying questions, they'll say, nope, don't get into that bit yet. So it keeps a tight grip on it so it reaches its purpose. Feels a little bit strange at first because you might think, well, how can in a few minutes you say something about a family that you've been working with for several months, but actually it works and it keeps it focused. Can we do the next slide, please, Dawn? Sorry, I'm just getting to my notes as well. So, yeah, it contributes to a collaborative approach on how we think about and understand complex information and manage risk. So it's pooling skills, ideas and knowledge, and you're not just relying on just your thinking, which can be so difficult sometimes because there's all sorts of dilemmas and challenges in our work. It gives us that thinking time because that's one of the difficulties in social work, that it's very fast-paced, quite relentless in its in your deadlines and the targets and the things that you need to be doing, and it just gives that protected time to make sure that we can do that. Role modelling best questions. So people may ask something about the family that you're working with that you may not have thought to ask yourself, and gives you another area to explore with what's happening with the family to help you come up with things that are going to best help them. It does promote relationships between the team and the colleagues. So, for example, we've got a student in our team at the moment, and obviously new starters come, and that helps them see people's faces because people aren't always in the office, so you might not actually meet somebody for a long time, but it gets that dialogue going because you're all talking about their family and what might best help them. It does help you learn about each other's strengths, and people come from different backgrounds into Cafcass. So, for example, in our Lincolnshire team, I know we've had people come from kinship assessment teams, fostering teams, children with disabilities, somebody's worked in secure units. So when doing these group supervisions, they may bring knowledge and expertise they've brought from that past role into our group supervisions and bring people new approaches and ideas for working with families that we may not have considered. So the solutions, it's a richness of thinking, really, things that you may have forgotten about that you might not have thought about to use with a family for a long time might just be a reminder, or it might be something that you've not thought about at all. So some of the ideas that have come out are things like storyboards, which are like words and pictures, life story pictures. People call them different things across the country in different organisations, I think, but that is something that Cafcass is making a very regular part of our practice. Scrum bracelets to measure alcohol use, and some of the other things that have come out is how we can try and reduce delay for children and approach the courts to speed that up. Magic moments, I would say. So that last year there was a student that, my student that brought a family to a group supervision. I wasn't part of that group supervision, I was doing something else. And it was a domestic abuse case. And he was really struggling with the values about the different parents' perspectives. And that did pick up some extra learning and training that he needed to do that difficult work. So that was some value out of that. And it meant that his thinking was kindly challenged by the team, and some more skills and knowledge shared with him in his journey to start being able to do that difficult work. And then that was able to be picked up in his individual student supervision. For students particularly, that the group supervision gives them access to lots of different social workers' experience and knowledge, so they're just completely invaluable, really. And then there's been another example would be, wasn't particularly, it was a worker not particularly looking for solutions with the family, but for some emotional support. So that ended up being some discussion around how we all cope with that, and she was worried about the impact on a large group of children that were potentially going to have to grow up in separate households. And so the group supervision was used in that way on that occasion. Could I have the next slide, please, Dawn? So this is the feedback from our team, that pooling all the practitioner knowledge everyone brings some creative solutions and sees things from a different perspective. I like how group supervision enables us to share ideas for practice that maybe we hadn't thought of ourselves, and this helps others who may be coming across similar situations. So just coming back to solutions, things that have worked for other families that other people may have worked with could then be used as an idea for a family that you're struggling to find some help for. Sometimes helps my confidence if others are thinking the same things as you, that you're not the only one that thinks along those lines, and just checking in that you're not off on some strange tangent somewhere. Becoming unstuck from situations where you don't know where to go next. Social work can feel really overwhelming, as I'm sure everybody listening to this can identify with, and it can just help clear up thinking and help your way through that. Having a weight lifted when something's bothering you about a situation and how things are progressing or not for a family, and that might relate back to when there's a bit of emotional support that comes out of that group supervision. Can I have the last slide, please, Dawn? And the final things that were said were, similar theme to what another comment was, ideas to help on stuck cases where you're not sure what might help next, or to help sort out thinking analysis when things are particularly complex, and you're looking for a way through it. Fresh ways of looking at using resources. So Cafcass has a lot of different resources and tools we can use for working with families. Sometimes you forget about ones that are really useful. Sometimes you've not actually used it very much, and other people might say, I found this really useful to do this with this family. Then you might go away and look at that yourself and use it. And it helps us implement the Together framework and use all the resources that have come out of that. Does contribute to team building, generates knowledge and ideas. And as I've just said, it makes you think about resources that you might not have thought about for a while or not used. And finally, somebody else said that it gave clarity to their recommendations, to be concise and fair to the parents involved, and get a more balanced view and be able to see things from another person's perspective again. I think that's everything I can say about it. But the only other thing I wanted to add was the other thing that happens in our Lincolnshire team is we have a buddying system, so we're paired up. And we also have an MS Teams chat, which started in the lockdown. And I think, and that has carried on, it's really useful, pulls bits of knowledge. People put their hand up to say, can I have a bit of time? I'm stuck on this. And all that feeds into these group supervisions as well and complements each other. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that from the team's perspective. That's so valuable. And we hope that everyone's enjoyed hearing actually how it's used and utilised in practice, not just the theory of it, but actually how we do it practically. Want to explore and unpick with you now just a little bit as we head towards the end of our presentation around our Learning Together and Learning with Children framework. It's a framework for how we share our learning across the year within the organisation, and also how we evidence that learning is impacting on our practice, because as we all know, attending an event is not where the learning will all come from. It's about what we do with that. It's about the impact it has and the action that we take with it. So as part of our internal Learning Together cycle, we hold practice pop-ups. Now, those practice pop-ups are bite-sized learning sessions, and they are focused on key areas of practice. And those are drawn from feedback, from complaints, from audit findings, from our internal audits, and our improvement priorities. There are national learning workshops that follow our national child record quality audits, so our big audits that we do, our reviews of practice. And we use those as an opportunity to discuss the learning and the feedback from families from those national audits as well. And learning from significant incidents is also shared regionally and nationally. And that may be learning from internal reviews, or it may be from the external safeguarding practice reviews. So we capture all of that and we share it back. The Cafcass Family Forum began in 2019. Some of you may be familiar with it. Our family forum, it's an opportunity for us to use feedback to better understand how families experience our service and how we can use that to improve future practice. Our intention is for children and families to have a better experience of Cafcass as a direct result of the feedback that we receive from the forum. They've put together some incredibly helpful guides, for example, already. And in 2020, with the help of our partners, this now includes listen and learn conversations. So this image that you can see on the slide, capturing that and really utilising that. Listen and learn conversations are for parents and carers. And how was it for you? Conversations are ones that we have with children and young people. So when a learning opportunity has been identified from a complaint or from feedback, that parent or carer will be invited to have a listen and learn conversation. Now, the complaint or the feedback may identify the potential for regional learning. It may actually identify the potential for organisational learning. And anybody can undertake a listen and learn conversation. So our heads of practice, our service managers, our assistant service managers may be responding to a complaint or to feedback from a family. And that may have identified learning that they want to understand better and peel back a little bit more around. Practice staff, family court advisors may want to use the listen and learn approach to seek feedback from families at the end of proceedings, or it can be used for peer learning. So, for example, a family court advisor might have a listen and learn conversation with a family that's actually worked with a different FCA, a different colleague, and bring that learning into group supervision. So actually bringing this together, tying this up, doing something active with it. After these listen and learn conversations, it's important that a parent and carer is aware of what we're going to do with their feedback. So a what needs to change letter is shared. And that letter provides that parent or carer with a summary of what was discussed in that restorative conversation and an opportunity for them to check the accuracy of that summary. And what the what needs to change letter will also include is an apology for any negative experience of our service, the learning points summarised, and the agreed actions that are going to be taken, and what we're going to do next. So there's a clear thread of accountability and action. Now, before I wrap up and we open this up to any questions or reflections from those of you who are with us in the room today, I'd like to leave you with some of the thoughts from the Family Justice Young People's Board, who earlier this year shared a paper with us. Now, the paper is entitled Learning from Mistakes, What Should You Do When Things Don't Go Well, and How Can You Work to Make Things Even Better? The FJYPB members recognise and accept that mistakes can and will happen across Cafcass. They are accidents, they're not intended to harm anybody, and they are an opportunity to learn. They captured some really valuable reflections, and I'm going to bring them in now for you. They've invited us to be kind to ourselves and create that safe space. Recognise as well that actually there's an expectation that we may make mistakes, and the FJYPB think we'll be more ready to deal with them if we remember that. Amend the mistake. Think about the impact of that on the children and the young people that we are working with, and work out whether things can be learned from what has happened. They also think it's important for us to make sure that both organisationally and for the FJYPB, we are clear that no one makes mistakes on purpose. And if something happens, that colleague is probably going to be feeling really bad about what has happened. And it's important that we have that kindness. We show that kindness to one another, as well as taking those steps to learn and stop it from happening again. The members are also encouraging us to think about their needs, the need of the children and the young people we work with, to be informed about that mistake in an age-appropriate way, thinking about how much they'll understand and how they might need reassurance in different ways. They've invited us to make a strong and sincere apology, explain what has happened, including the things we're doing to reduce the chances of repetition of that mistake. The FJYPB also think it's important that all colleagues feel able to tell someone about the mistake that's been made and to feel supported. They've emphasised that they believe that staff need to feel trusted so that communication is healthy and it's safe. They want us to implement change quickly, not just sit on it, but do something about it. And learn from our mistakes and others' mistakes as well. And finally, that bottom bullet point there, mistakes help us learn and move forward. They're asking us to capture that learning in training events to reach as many colleagues as possible. And one final comment in the paper that I wanted to share with you today is that it's about progress and not perfection in all aspects of our work, but particularly when we are thinking about when things haven't gone well and they need to be done better next time and in the future. I wanted to share this one with you today and leave you with this thought. We are going to open up now for questions and for reflections as well. As we move through that, if perhaps you haven't got anything, but you are still listening, I would leave you with the questions that we capture at the end of all of our group supervisions, our training events, everything that we do internally. What were your key learnings? How might this benefit and improve your practice? What are you going to do to embed it into your practice? And what additional support might you need to take it forward? I am going to stop screen sharing with you now. And I'm going to hand over to Jack, who's going to take this forward for this next section.
I think we're going to come to you, Ruth, aren't we, first?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much to Dawn, Sarah and Kathy. I know it's a really common theme in social work and social workers that we speak to, that it's really hard to get access to reflective supervision sometimes. So it was brilliant to hear about what Cafcass is doing and some really practical examples of ways that you hold that group supervision, and hear Kathy's perspective as well on how that works for your team. So thank you very much. And we do have quite a few questions to get through. So got an anonymous question around sort of reflective supervision, saying this is emotional and complex work. How realistic is it that social workers can expect to get regular support?
It's a great question. Dawn, I'm going to come to you first, if I may.
Absolutely. It is an expectation, actually, within organisationally, that our colleagues will be offered that regular support. So in lots of different ways. And I think that's partly what I hope we've shared with you today, that actually our supervision may not come just one-on-one with a line manager. There are assistant service managers. There are other management level colleagues that are available and accessible. I think sometimes we can underestimate the value of that peer-to-peer discussion as well, and really capturing the depth and the quality of that comes through in group supervision, in those appreciative inquiry conversations. But absolutely, we're aware of that. And it's one of the reasons we have such clear expectations around our management oversight, around the supervision that is offered, and about how we do that organisationally. We have the policies in place. We have those expectations and standards that's there for our colleagues. The work we do is hard. It is emotionally draining, particularly some of the work that our colleagues are doing with the families that we're working with in court and in the proceedings that are there. I don't think it's an unrealistic expectation, though. And I think it's something that colleagues should be asking for. I've never had a bad supervision.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would want to add is that Dawn's already said it, and Sarah has as well, that we're trying to move from a supervision that's focused on compliance. Have you done this? Have you done that? Have you done the other? To much more that deeper reflective and learning conversations. Dawn, do you want to just talk a little bit about the specialist supervision training that we've put in place for supervisors?
Yeah, absolutely. We've recently, all of our service managers have recently been offered the opportunity, and the vast majority are through it or nearly through it, to access specialist 4x4x4 supervision training led by an external trainer. We recognise we have a huge depth of knowledge and experience within the organisation, but the benefit of having someone who absolutely specialises in that area of practice is invaluable. The feedback has been amazing, and we're looking to continue to roll that out. So our assistant service managers will be our next cohort, our heads of practice as well, because there are layers of supervision, and we recognise the need for a top-down modelling of this as well. Very, very passionate about the importance of doing supervision well and the value that it brings into those spaces.
Yeah. Kathy, is there anything you'd like to add about reflective supervision? I mean, you talked earlier about finding the time with such busy schedules. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
I think the timing's difficult, because when you need emotional support around something, it doesn't always run on schedule. So say you've come out of a very difficult court hearing, that's when you might need some time within the next hour or two. So that's the challenge, I think, being able to access that when you really need it at the time. But I've seen in Cafcass that supervision has become more reflective and less about deadlines and things like that. So Yeah, I would think, and perhaps maybe what needs putting in place in our diaries is when we know we've got a final hearing or something like that coming up that we know might be emotionally draining, to make sure we've put some space in for some debriefing at the end of that, and that
Really
might be a way of meeting that challenge.
It's a great suggestion, Kathy. Or when you know that you're going to have a particularly difficult visit to a family as well. Yeah, absolutely. Back to you, Ruth.
Brilliant, thank you. So another question saying, I've recently transitioned from a local authority social worker to a manager and am receiving a lot of resistance to change and learning. I've tried to involve staff, but they are not willing to engage in focus groups or conversations about change. Do you have any advice on how to introduce critical thinking and reflective learning when there is so much resistance to change?
Wow. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that's your experience, and I think although you can tell by my age, it was a long time ago. I can remember the first time I stepped up into a manager role with optimism and energy about doing things, and you do come across resistance. Of course, you come across people who are saying, "I've been doing a perfectly good job, thank you, Jack, for a number of years. Why are you asking me to do things differently?" Or, you know, why are you bringing that? One of my piece of advice, but I'm going to come to you, Sarah, just to give you a heads up. And my piece of advice is make sure that your organization is doing something about it. I mean, we've talked about our unified model of social work together. And as Dawn was describing, and Sarah has as well, it's about a whole organization approach. It's very difficult if you're on your own with something like that, without the backing of that kind of cultural change, you know, that commitment, that intention behind you. Sarah, let me come to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Really interesting question, and something that really resonates with me, thinking about how we implemented and we continue to develop our practice framework, because we found ourselves in similar circumstances. We had a number of colleagues who embraced our thinking and came alongside us, but equally a number of colleagues who felt concerned about what was being asked of them and what that meant. And we really had to think carefully, because one of the things that we've been very clear about is this is a collaborative approach. This is all of us in the organisation, no matter what you do, all working together and all moving forward together. So I think for me, one of the things that's been really important is really continuing to emphasise that point, but also really recognising the strengths within practice and within work that already exist. This hasn't been about change for the sake of it, and that you know, we never wanted to give a message that people weren't good enough and that work wasn't good enough, but really helping people to understand the why. And I think that's always so important, because if people can understand the why they're being asked to do something in a certain way, that can really support colleagues. And if I'm asked to do something that's perhaps in addition or different, I want to know the why first and foremost, because that's really important. And I think having the values there set out and keep coming back to that and keep centering everything on that has been really crucial. And we've had to roll with resistance at times. We've had to do that. We've got a clear model, a high support, high challenge model. We've got high expectations, but in addition to that, we offer that high level of support.
Another thing that I would like to add, and Dawn and Sarah and Kathy have exemplified it actually, is one of the real ways of bringing about change, with a rationale about the why, as Sarah has just said, is what children and families tell us. I mean, you can see the impact that has on practitioners. I don't think I've ever met a social worker that doesn't want to do their best for children and for their families, ever in my whole career, in the 40 years or so that I've been a social worker myself. And so the voice of the child, the feedback from children and families. I've done a listen and learn session. In fact, I've done 2. Incredibly powerful, listening directly, and then using that, sharing that with colleagues as well. I mean, it's one thing for Jack Cordery as the director to say, right, guys, we're all going to be doing this. But when children and the Family Justice Young People's Board are saying it to us, it just has more power than somebody like me. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. So we've got quite a few questions about group supervision as well, which clearly people want to know more about. So yes, someone's asked if group supervision replaces one-to-one supervision some months, or if it's on top of it. And also a couple of questions asking, how do you decide what will be discussed during group supervision, and how many on average are in the group?
I'm going to come to you in a minute, Dawn, but just before I do, I think with the complex dilemmas that you face as social workers every day of your working life, it can be incredibly lonely. And I think, as Kathy was saying, almost scheduling when you know something's going to be really tough, a one-to-one with somebody that you really trust, a service manager, or for us, an assistant service manager, for example, and taking and using group supervision in a slightly different way, but still being really helpful. Let me come to you, Dawn, and we're certainly not replacing one-to-one supervision with group supervision, so I'll just get that in before you, Dawn, but over to you.
Absolutely. No. The supervision models all sit alongside one another, and I think they massively complement one another as well. The value of that one-to-one discussion allows you, in that, hopefully, that very psychologically safe space, to unpick with your line manager or a line manager, a senior colleague, the issues around a particular practice issue, issues around a particular family. And that's exactly what it's intended to be there for. It's exactly what it is there for. The benefit of group supervision is, I think, as Kathy highlighted, that's many minds in one space, all bringing their brilliance into that space with you. And there's such value in that, in different ways. And they are intended to complement one another, to sit alongside one another. Nothing is supplanting or superseding in any way. I think in terms of numbers, that can sometimes depend on regions and depend on teams, and perhaps the nature of the conversation that's being had or being discussed in that space. And I think in terms of the question as well, wasn't there, Ruth, around the kind of topics of discussion? People are invited to bring that topic in with them. You may find some people are keener to talk about their burning issue in that space. Some areas I know in some conversations are a little bit more scheduled. So, for example, Sarah is leading a session this afternoon, I think it is, where the topic has already been decided and the material has been circulated to bring people into that space. Other conversations are much more about who has an issue you'd like to discuss today, who has a family that actually you're struggling with knowing what to do next for the best for this particular child. So it can very much be at point of need, which is one of the benefits of it. Yeah. But it's different models depending on what you're doing and what you're needing in that space. There isn't a one size fits all or a formula that we would say we followed every time.
I think I've in conversations with service managers and assistant service managers, sometimes they've identified a theme in the team that's come up in one-to-one supervision that then they brought to the team to get that the collective power of the team to address that particular dilemma that is a thematic dilemma, if you like, for the practitioners in the team. Have we got time for one more, Ruth?
Yes. Sorry to anyone whose question we can't get to, but there are a lot. So someone's actually asked what the routes are into becoming a family court advisor, and someone's also asked, sort of they currently work in adults, but what support would there be if they came to work in children's? So I don't know if it's possible to answer those.
Wonderful question. It's always wonderful to me if anybody is thinking about coming to join us at Cafcass. I'd recommend it. But Kathy, can I come to you and for you to talk about your route into Cafcass?
I worked in child protection teams for about 12 years before I joined Cafcass. And if I'm honest, it was frustration when I thought something else needed to be happening with families, and I wanted to be able to work a bit more independently, which you can do in Cafcass. The other part of the question was about support. It's a long time since I joined Cafcass, but one of the things we have in our teams for new starters, there's a whole induction programme. Some of that is some core national training that they access. The practice supervisors in the team also do some sort of shorter sessions, which they've done with some of my students as well. Then there's the group supervisions, which would help them. They're usually linked up with a mentor in our team as well. And our main supervisions are quarterly, which doesn't sound very much, but there's a lot of other supervisions go on at the point of when you need it. And there's some mandatory triggers for different things. So I would say there's a lot of support for new people joining Cafcass. And you would bring adjustable skills over from adult services.
Definitely bring transferable skills, and that's what we're looking for, really, colleagues. Is the value base, which you've seen in terms of together, and those transferable skills. We're not looking for anything particular. And I think Kathy was talking earlier about colleagues that have joined the team from a variety of different backgrounds as well. Are we out of time, Ruth, or have we got longer?
I'm afraid we are out of time. So yeah, we'll have to wrap it up there. But if there's anything final you'd like to say, please do.
Well, I think I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm just going to say some thank yous. My biggest thank you is to those of you who've joined us today. I know it's really tough taking time out of your busy schedules. We really hope that you found it helpful. You will get copies of the slides. And keep the dialogue going with us. Feel free to give us feedback, what you like about what you've heard and what you feel would make it better. I suppose what I would just like to say is this, that social work can't thrive if we don't give social workers the time and the space, as you've heard from Dawn and from Sarah and Kathy today, to think and to reflect about the really tough dilemmas that you face every day of your working lives, whether that's in one-to-one supervision with a trusted supervisor or in group supervision. So I'd just like to say thank you to my wonderful community care colleagues for not just supporting us in organising this event, but the Festival of Learning as well. It's such a fabulous event in the year, just like Community Care Live is as well. Big thank you to Dawn and Sarah, of course, but an even bigger thank you to you, Kathy, for stepping in. Really appreciate that. And as I say, colleagues, I hope you found it helpful. You'll get copies of the slides. Please come back to us with any feedback. Feedback is the food of learning. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.